Hi, I'm David. I have collected the most interesting historical photos for you. I hope you like it. May 3rd, 1968, the United States Navy River Monitor Zippo in the Mekong Delta, sending two bright fuel streams toward both riverbanks. It was done to clear thick riverside plants, so the crew was less likely to be surprised from the shore. In April 1918 in Oklahoma, people sprint across a field as a huge military gas balloon suddenly bursts into a dark cloud. These tethered balloons were used for training and sky watching during the First World War. This photo from the Big Freeze winter of 1962 to 1963 shows a British road swallowed by deep snow, with cars half buried as a plow tries to cut a path. The cold spell began on 26 December 1962 and lasted into March 1963. Akron, Ohio, 1938. Rubber factory workers pack the street as police push through the crowd during a protest over planned pay cuts. Akron was called the rubber capital of the world. Madrid, March 19, 1938. A five-story building called Casablanca vanishes behind a towering dust cloud caught at the exact second it gives way. Singapore, February 26, 1942. A Chinese father and his daughter eat rice inside a ruined home after a Japanese aircraft raid. Dust and broken beams surround them, yet they keep eating without looking up. These mugshots show 6 German Abwehr agents arrested in the United States in 1942 after secretly coming ashore from a submarine in Florida. Their plan targeted major factories and transport lines, but 2 members went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation first. On the aircraft carrier Midway, a finned underwing round slips from a jet and skims along the deck into the sea. Records from 1964 to 1988 list several repeats, including 3 on Midway and at least 7 on Coral Sea. In 1980, 4 men took control of a Turkish Airlines flight from Munich to Ankara and let journalist Coskun Aral into the cockpit to take this photo. After a refuel stop in Diyarbakir, all passengers were released safely, and the men were arrested. On December 14, 1992, Salvadoran guerrillas empty their rifles into the air so they can hand them over for destruction under United Nations control. It marked a visible step in the peace process after 12 years of civil conflict in El Salvador. Nicknamed Foolish One and Trench Runner, this small delivery dog from the 11th Sapper Regiment carried cigarettes and small treats between trench positions with a box strapped to his back. Comrades said he lifted morale and kept returning to duty even after being hurt twice. In 1961, a crane lowers huge concrete blocks into place as the first Berlin Wall barrier cuts through a city street. Within weeks, this rough line became a hardened border that stopped most crossings overnight. Tokyo, March 10, 1945. This aerial image shows wooden neighborhoods glowing after a United States B-29 air raid. The fast-spreading blaze formed a huge, swirling heat column, and more than 100,000 lives were lost in one night. Dresden, 1935. A uniformed Nazi official stands beside a modernist portrait at an exhibition meant to mock so-called degenerate art. These shows pushed the public toward state-approved art by turning certain styles into a public target. On October 24, 1970, the Soviet probe Zond 8 photographed the moon's far side, a face humans never see from Earth. It is packed with craters and has far fewer smooth dark plains because its crust is thicker. The United States Navy destroyer Selfridge sits with its entire front section smashed, leaving the forward guns twisted over the water. After the night action near Vella La Vella in the Solomon Islands in 1943, the ship was repaired and returned to duty. Hue, Vietnam, 1968. A United States Marine sits with an empty stare, his helmet and uniform coated in gray dust. Hugh's ancient stone citadel and tight streets formed a maze where exhaustion could hit without warning. Berlin, 1944. The night sky fills with bright streaks and hanging light as air defense fire and flares mark an incoming British raid. Long exposure photography turns seconds of motion into these eerie vertical light pillars over the rooftops. Prague, 1970, 66 T-55 tanks line up on the new Nusel Bridge during a load test. Engineers used the heaviest vehicles available to prove the concrete span could handle extreme stress before full traffic. London, 1968. Physicist Stephen Hawking marches beside activist Tariq Ali and actor Vanessa Redgrave under a Vietnam Solidarity Campaign banner. Hawking is already using walking sticks here, years before he began using a wheelchair. 1932. Factory workers pose with some of the earliest wooden Lego toys, including small trucks and a pull train. The company began as a Danish carpentry shop making wooden playthings years before the first plastic bricks appeared in 1949. Boston, 1919. Fenway Park is packed so tightly that the field becomes a sea of hats, flags, and banners supporting Irish independence. The scene shows the power of the Irish-American community. New York City, 1939. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia stares at a 300-pound halibut hanging upside down at the Fulton Fish Market. The fish weighs about 136 kilograms, nearly as much as a small piano. September 6, 1976. A Soviet Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-25P sits on a Japanese airfield surrounded by onlookers. Pilot Viktor Belenko flew it there, giving foreign engineers their first close look at this ultra-fast aircraft. Naples, Italy, 1908. A street vendor serves spaghetti from a stall with huge pots and a steaming metal urn. From the 17th to the 19th century, pasta was common street food here, often eaten by hand instead of with a fork. Berlin, 1961. Workers stack fresh concrete blocks into a street barrier while an East German guard watches from the front. The wall began as quick masonry like this, then grew into a multi-layer border with fences, patrol roads, and watchtowers. In 1944, at an airfield near Poltava, a United States B-17 bomber gunner shakes hands with a Soviet soldier during the rare shuttle missions that used bases in the Soviet Union. On the ground, the bombs carry the same message in Russian and English. To Hitler. Near Cranwell in Lincolnshire, a BE-2 training biplane ends up almost vertical, caught beside a telegraph pole and its wires. The BE-2 was designed to be very steady for beginners, yet one bad landing could leave its light wood and fabric frame stuck like this. Manhattan, 1912. The Equitable Building is buried in ice after firefighters drenched it in winter, leaving thick frozen sheets hanging from the walls and windows. The Equitable was built in 1870, and this freeze turned the sidewalk into a slick canyon of ice. Dozens of workers pose around a giant Kaplan turbine runner before installation, showing the scale of a hydroelectric machine designed for fast, low-drop rivers. Its propeller blades can change angle while spinning. Crete, May, 1941. Parachutes dot the sky as German airborne troops descend, while a transport aircraft trails dark smoke over a rocky ridge. It was one of the first major airborne landings in history, and its high cost made many commanders rethink large parachute drops. December 1941, Leningrad. A scale shows the daily bread ration of 125 grams during the siege. It was the lowest official daily bread ration in the city at that time. At Brooklands in Britain, British driver John Cobb sits in his Railton land speed car, a smooth shell hiding the huge wheels and engine underneath. In September 1938, he reached 350 miles per hour at Bonneville in Utah. Lancashire, September 23, 1946. Schoolboys form a human chain, wading through a flooded street outside a milk bar and cafe. The River Irwell overflowed, and about 5,000 homes were affected. In 1915, pilots trained on rail carts and swinging seats that copied a cockpit so they could practice aiming a mounted aircraft rig from the ground. By 1916, these cheap setups were widespread, teaching students how to lead moving targets before real flights. Pyrebright, Britain, August 1, 1929. A British soldier in a gas mask sights a water-cooled Vickers .303 machine gun during training. The gun's water jacket let it run for long bursts, so crews carried extra water cans and spare barrels were less urgent. This is the German Me-323 Gigant, a huge transport plane with 6 Gnome-Rhone 14N engines lined along its wing. It could haul about 11 tons of cargo, cruised around 250 kilometers per hour, and had a practical range near 700 kilometers. An American comedian, Bob Burns, holds his homemade bazooka musical instrument made from a whiskey funnel and a cut gas pipe, posing beside a United States Army officer holding the M1 bazooka launcher. The funny instrument name was borrowed for the real launcher and stuck worldwide. Tanzania, 1973. A team captures a cheetah for transfer to a zoo, gripping its long tail that works like a steering rudder in a sprint. Cheetahs are the fastest land animal, reaching about 110 kilometers per hour. Anchorage, March 27, 1964. A city street drops and splits open during the Great Alaska Earthquake, leaving cars hanging over the edge. It measured about 9.2 and lasted around 4 minutes, making it one of the strongest quakes ever recorded in North America. London, 1930. A police officer halts traffic while a herd of pigs crosses tram tracks between cars and delivery trucks. It is a snapshot of a city still fed by nearby farms, when animals could share the road with motor vehicles. Dominion Creek in the Yukon near Alaska. 3 children work a gold claim, shaking gravel through screens and a rocker box to catch tiny flakes in the riffles. The real surprise is that a whole day of this backbreaking sorting could end with just a pinch of gold dust in the pan. Berlin, 1961. Workers pour concrete into long wooden forms as a crane lowers heavy blocks for the first wall sections. The speed is the shock here, because this border began as a rushed work site and hardened into a divided city within days. Russia, 1920. Soldiers in a telephone and telegraph unit take an exam in arithmetic and Russian, solving problems on a standing chalkboard. Armies depended on literate signal crews because one wrong number or word could scramble messages. Washington, September 13, 1926. Robed Ku Klux Klan members march down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the United States Capitol as crowds watch from both sides. In the 1920s, the group staged public parades like this. Kagoshima, Japan, 1945. A Japanese Army Air Force pilot is handed a koi-shaped good luck kite beside his aircraft before takeoff. The carp was a symbol of perseverance, and many pilots carried personal charms and short poems as a last calm ritual. Falklands, April 1982. Sunlight streams through rows of small holes in a hangar roof as British troops shelter inside in silhouette. The roof turns into a star map, with each beam marking where metal punched through from above. Second World War Lend-Lease. Soviet inspectors climb a wall of United States food crates marked Swift's Bacon and Pure Lard. These shipments brought rare high-calorie meat and fat to a hungry country, with English labels becoming everyday sights far from America. New Jersey, 1945. An undercover police officer dressed as a woman was mistakenly arrested by another officer who thought he was a street worker. The mix-up ended only at the station, when his identity was verified and everyone realized how convincing the disguise was. Leningrad, September 9, 1941. A fresh crater opens on the Fontanka Canal embankment while people line the railings to stare into it. The granite paving slabs are tossed like cards, showing how a normal street can change in one moment. 1942. Civilians haul scrap metal through a city street, carrying pipes and even bed frames to be melted down for wartime industry. Many drives turned old railings, pots, and broken machines into raw steel for new equipment. Germany, 1945. United States Army soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division pose with a banner that reads, "This is Jülich, Germany. Sorry it is so messed up, but we were in a hurry." The joke points to how fast the front was moving, with towns changing hands before repairs could even start. Brentwood, New York, 1938. A patient in the Pilgrim State Hospital lies strapped to a treatment table with only the head exposed under tight linens. Pilgrim was one of the largest psychiatric hospitals in the United States, built to hold thousands at a time. Los Angeles, 1948. A derailed diesel locomotive ends up balanced on a high concrete wall, hanging over the street below. The bent power pole shows how much force it took to lift a multi-ton engine that high. New York City, 1937. Firefighters spray a burning building while a giant sign above it reads, "High-grade all beef frankfurters," and simply add boiling water. The dark joke is real because the ad's words float over the smoke like part of the scene. In 1952, dancer and actress Sid Charisse had her legs insured for $5 million. Guinness World Records reported it as the highest leg insurance of its era. Germany, 1945. Soldiers push a luxury car up a ramp into a cargo plane, part of the huge post-war movement of seized equipment and trophy goods. In the Soviet occupation zone, official records list mass confiscations, including about 60,000 pianos. Norway, around 1920. A worker stands on a wooden scaffold wrapped around a giant steel water pipe for the Glomfjord power plant, high above the fjord. The pipe would send fast-falling water to turbines below, turning this quiet valley into a major source of electricity. Mekong Delta, August 1967. Bellevue. H-1 helicopters hover low as United States troops rush from the wetbanks to form a perimeter. This Huey became the sound of the Vietnam War, flying thousands of short hops a day to move people and supplies through flooded terrain. Robert Pershing Wadlow, born in 1918, became the tallest recorded person, reaching 8 feet 11.1 inches, which is about 2.72 meters. His extreme height was caused by an overactive pituitary gland that kept releasing growth hormone. San Antonio, 1910. A city built a towering municipal bat roost to attract thousands of bats as a natural night patrol for mosquitoes. The idea was promoted by Dr. Charles Campbell, who argued that one big bat tower could cut insect numbers without chemicals. March 1917. Sacks of flour are stacked on the steps after a hidden store was found inside a police station, while officials write down the count. In that year's food shortages, flour was so tightly controlled that one secret cache could change an entire neighborhood's bread lines. Inside an Arsenal training room in London, a woman demonstrates a mechanical football practice rig while players in kit crowd around to watch. The frame shows early sports engineering in action. Two helmeted residents watch a house on Jaime as the Eldfell volcano sends thick ash and smoke across the sky in January 1973. The eruption grew a new cone and covered parts of the island with fresh lava. A United States president talks through a window to the Apollo 11 astronauts inside the mobile quarantine facility aboard the aircraft carrier Hornet in July 1969. The crew stayed in this sealed trailer after returning from the moon to prevent possible contamination. A French soldier detains a German soldier lying in a roadside ditch beside a wrecked car. The empty road and dented sedan show how an everyday spot became a hiding place. A young United States Army serviceman carries a large duffel bag and paperwork beside wooden barracks, photographed in March 1958. The shoulder straps cut across his jacket while he looks straight at the camera mid-step, like a quick snapshot taken between duties. A cutaway display shows a dual-purpose room labeled as a family fallout shelter, OCDM, with parents and children sitting inside like it is a normal den. The staged room includes a television, radio, and board games. Seddon Crater at the Nevada test site was formed on July 6, 1962 during the Plowshare underground excavation experiment. It is about 1,280 feet wide and 320 feet deep, created when the surface ground collapsed into a cavity after the test device was set off 635 feet below. A crew is attaching a new star to a huge United States flag while it hangs from a building, with workers watching from the roof. The added star represents Alaska as the 49th state, and the 49-star flag became official in 1959. An astronaut stands beside the lunar roving vehicle on the gray surface of the moon, with camera crosshair marks spread across the frame. This iconic Apollo 17 image was taken on December 13, 1972. A hidden lookout sits inside a fake tree made of fabric and wire mesh, holding a paper map as he blends into an empty field. This staged disguise was photographed in Pas-de-Calais, France, on May 15, 1918. A long line of men in hats and suits stands on an open field while uniformed officials and a small band gather to the side. The scene is labeled Veracruz, Mexico, 1914, and the calm order makes it feel like a public ritual just before history turns. Three very large men pose outdoors by a table, with one man cradling another in his arms like a child while they grin at the camera. Paper cups on the table and their relaxed posture make the scene feel like a playful strength and friendship moment caught on film. Three crew members stand around a performer in a bulky movie monster suit, adjusting a wide breathing tube and a boxy chest panel on the costume. The blank face mask and improvised gear show how practical handmade effects created otherworldly characters in 1951. A sleek Italian fast motorboat cuts through the sea in 1918, with sailors riding high on the deck above long metal tubes. It became famous that year for a night operation linked to the loss of the Austro-Hungarian ship Szent István. A Salvation Army volunteer hands fresh donuts to helmeted soldiers at a field canteen around 1917, with a Salvation Army War Service box right in front. This scene helped inspire the later tradition of Donut Day in the United States. A line of women lies on the ground in an outdoor practice range, aiming long wooden and metal training gear in perfect alignment, while a group watches from behind. The strict rows, calm faces, and crowded spectators make it look like a public skills test, not a casual lesson. A winding path cuts through empty fields toward distant factory blocks and a tall chimney, all softened by thick morning haze in Budapest, Hungary, in 1955. Tiny figures walk in a long line, their stretched shadows turning the road into a dark ribbon across a quiet industrial edge. Streetcars roll past a landscape of collapsed brick and standing walls in Chicago after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The city keeps moving through the dust as if the streets refuse to admit what just happened. A 1930s wanted poster collage shows a man with an ID number beside a United States Bureau of Investigation criminal record sheet, mugshots, and fingerprints. The layout shows how early federal files linked a face, prints, and aliases into one searchable record. People lie shoulder to shoulder on the platform and even between the rails in Aldwych Tube Station while uniformed wardens watch over the crowd. In 1940, this disused London station became an overnight refuge during the Blitz. Several people in work clothes walk down the steep sides of a massive crater cut into the Nevada desert. The scene shows a United States nuclear test site in 1967, where the ground was reshaped into a bowl so large it makes the visitors look tiny. A very large woman in a frilly dress stands beside an extremely short adult man in a suit and bow tie, posing for a studio-style photograph. The size contrast was often used in traveling shows and publicity photos in the early 1920s. A man sits on a stool playing the follyphone, a deliberately fake instrument built as a joke with oversized horns, pipes, and rows of dummy keys and buttons. It looks like a mashup of an organ and an industrial air system. A small man with a tiny mustache and formal coat stands beside a much larger man leaning in, turning their size difference into the main joke of the scene. The set looks like a shop or lab, with rows of glass bottles behind them that make the moment feel like a silent film skit, frozen mid-punchline. Repair workers cling to a narrow scaffold on the Empire State Building, with Manhattan blocks far below, like a map. The photo was taken in 1945 during repairs after a B-25 bomber accident, showing how routine work can look unreal at height. A social media post shows a formal portrait beside a stamped Portuguese consular document, claiming the man issued thousands of Portuguese passports against orders during the Second World War. A social media post shares a black and white classroom photo of young women seated at long desks, looking toward the camera in a plain room. The caption claims it is a Kurdish girls' school in Iran shortly before the revolution. 5 exhausted men in Soviet uniforms stand behind a wire fence, staring straight at the camera in a cold yard with brick buildings behind them. The caption says they were Soviet detainees found by United States troops near Sarreguemines in France in December 1944. In Egypt in 1930, workers clear sand from a giant seated statue of Ramesses II, still stuck deep in the ground. The calm face rising from the earth shows how a world-famous king can stay hidden for a very long time. A communal canteen in China shows workers hunched over bowls and steamed buns beneath a wall slogan pushing thrift and harder output. Historians link scenes like this to the Great Leap Forward era, when a nationwide food shortage became one of the largest crises of the 20th century. This newly developed photograph from 31 lost film rolls shows weary men sitting beside electrified rail tracks, caught in a quiet moment of travel in the 1940s. After decades in the dark, the unknown photographer's images resurfaced. In 1945, men pose inside the unfinished hull of the German tracked vehicle known as GW Tiger, still open like a factory skeleton. The giant empty frame reveals a machine that was planned on paper but never truly ready in metal. In Berlin in 1990, a former United States president poses with a hammer, chipping at a concrete section of the Berlin Wall while steel bars frame the shot. The moment captures the wall turning from a border into a souvenir in front of cheering onlookers. London, March 11, 1941. British Broadcasting Corporation staff in headphones scan German radio broadcasts and chalk urgent updates onto a board labeled Flash. They log each sentence as it happens because a signal can fade and the words are lost. On the treeless Great Plains, a pioneer woman stands beside a wheelbarrow piled with dried buffalo chips, gathered as everyday fuel. Settlers burned them for cooking and heat when wood was hard to find. An aerial view of Iwo Jima in 1945 shows a dark smoke column stretching across the small volcanic island and its pale beaches. This tiny speck mattered because its airfield sat on a key middle route between the Mariana Islands and Japan. In 1945, Dutch fields were planted to spell "Many Thanks" in tulips, a living message aimed at Allied crews dropping food to starving towns. From the air, the letters turned farmland into a giant thank you card that only pilots could read. In the Arctic tundra in 1942, Soviet signal troops use a dog team to haul wire and gear while they stretch a telephone line across endless snow. Those thin cables carried messages faster than any person, linking remote posts with no roads at all. In German East Africa during the First World War, a British rider sits on a horse painted in bold zebra stripes to blend into the African landscape from a distance. It is a clever trick. The moving stripes break the animal's shape, so it is harder to spot at a glance. In San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury, a payphone carries a handwritten warning: "Never say here what you would not say to a police officer." The worn rotary dial and that blunt message freeze the neighborhood's late 1960s mood of privacy and distrust. In Norway in the 1890s, 3 men ride side by side on 3 bicycle designs, from towering high-wheel models to the newer low-safety bicycle. One street scene shows a whole technology shift happening in plain view. London, June 27, 1940. Schoolgirls wearing gas masks play jump rope during recess, turning emergency gear into a normal part of childhood. The rope's arc and their casual poses show how quickly fear can become routine. In 1955, a Cobalt-60 therapy machine swings around a person on a table to aim a tight beam at deep tissue growths. This rotating design was an early breakthrough that helped doctors focus treatment while sparing more healthy skin. In the meantime, I'm talking about these amazing historical photos. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most. I will be glad to read and respond to your comment. In 1931, the ocean liner Empress of Britain towers over the shipyard like a floating building, held in place by cranes and scaffolding. The tiny people and rail tracks below show the true scale of a ship designed to be a moving city at sea. Moscow, 1958. The street outside the United States Embassy is covered with fallen protest signs after a rally about United States troops entering Lebanon. The snapped poles and scattered slogans show how a faraway crisis could shake this quiet fence line. In 1942, a Royal Navy sailor aboard His Majesty's ship Alcantara repairs a signal flag with a portable sewing machine during a voyage to Sierra Leone. His intense stare and the tiny stitches show how ocean communication depended on cloth staying perfect. Around 1935 in Worcester, England, ice cream seller Bert Taylor works from a tricycle cart covered in bold price signs and the line, "Stop me and buy one." The handover of a coin beside that slogan shows how street ads were built into the vehicle itself. On a barber ship, Sergeant Geisler sits in the chair with his arm in a heavy cast while the barber drapes a cape like it is an ordinary trim. The mirror and clean white cloth turn a medical setback into a calm, almost comedic routine at sea. In Kuwait in the 1950s, camel riders watch the old city gate as a modern sedan rolls through beneath English motor oil ads. The gate becomes a timeline, with camels and cars sharing the same doorway. At a wartime bakery camp near Dijon in the 1910s, young women bag exactly 416 loaves, stacking them into huge sacks marked for the army. The hard numbers on the scene make it feel like a factory line where every loaf is counted for someone far away. In 1919, Princess Patricia inspects Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry as a soldier kneels with the unit's flag for a formal ceremony. Her name became the regiment's title, so this single face in the field turned into a lifelong identity for thousands. In the United States in 1922, a rider crouches low on a motorized bicycle, gripping the bars as the tiny engine vibrates under the frame. This early racing machine sits right on the border between pedal power and the modern motorcycle. Berlin, August 21, 1948. Workers paint a thin line across Potsdamer Platz to mark where the Soviet sector ends and the British sector begins, while officials watch. A simple stripe on cobblestones turns one street into two different systems overnight. In France during the First World War, a pilot trainee slumps in a Barani chair while a doctor steadies the device after a rotation test for balance. The drill exposed how easily the inner ear can lie, even to a strong, trained mind. In 1917, a Spanish soldier uses a giant horn listening device to catch the distant sound of approaching Zeppelin airships before they appear in the sky. It is an early warning system that turns wind and metal into a signal. On Tarawa in 1943, rubber boats crowd the end of a pier as troops move exhausted men away from the shoreline. The calm water hides how hard it was to carry people and supplies across a shallow reef in the middle of chaos. Britain, 1940. Home Guard volunteers push an improvised armored car, a civilian sedan wrapped in thick steel plates with small viewing holes. Built fast from scrap to guard roads during invasion scares, it shows how an ordinary car became a mobile shield overnight. Vancouver, 1958. A temporary ski jump tower rises over Empire Stadium for the centennial celebrations of the colony of British Columbia. Built by 25 people in 13 days, it stood 165 feet tall and cost $42,000. In 1898, a tent labeled Recruiting Station Old Guard Regiment pulls a dense crowd under a huge American flag on a cobblestone street. After the battleship Maine disaster, scenes like this show how fast public shock turned into enlistment lines. Washington, District of Columbia, 1924. Trainer Charlie Becker brings a small elephant into a bank, and the elephant reaches the counter with a money satchel for a theater deposit. The stunned faces behind the marble rail prove this was not a normal banking day. On a Los Angeles street in 1961, suited cast and crew pose during the pilot shoot for the television series The New Breed, with City Hall fading into the background. The microphone in hand shows it was filmed like a real street report, not a studio set. A tired man in uniform sits on broken boards, sorting small personal items from a ration box, while piles of luggage surround him. The scene shows how, after capture, every bag could be emptied and counted like paperwork. Washington, District of Columbia, 1928. Smithsonian staff pose with the Langley Aerodrome, an early flying machine with odd wings and twin propellers, built years before airplanes became reliable. It looks fragile on its wooden stands, yet it represents the bold moment when flight was still a risky experiment. In 1909, 3 Conti people stand outside a log building holding newly bought bottles and tin cups after trading fur to a local merchant. The mix of traditional clothing and factory-made goods shows how one deal could change daily life in the far north. British Columbia, November 7, 1885. Donald Smith, later Lord Strathcona, drives the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway as a crowd of workers closes in. Behind him stands Sanford Fleming, the railway planner who helped popularize time zones. Nampo Harbor, January 1978. South Korean film star Choi Yoon-hee is pictured meeting Kim Jong-il after she was secretly brought into North Korea. Her screen fame was later used to build movies for the state until she escaped abroad in 1986. After the Great Vancouver Fire of 1886, 4 Vancouver Police Department officers pose in front of a tent labeled City Hall because the real building is gone. The uniforms look official, but the backdrop shows a city restarting from canvas and ash. Near Cleve, Germany, March 18, 1945. Captain Samuel Cass, a rabbi, leads the first Jewish service for soldiers of Canada's First Army, holding a Torah scroll cover. In the middle of a moving front line, this quiet ritual marks identity. Ellis Island, New York, 1907. A Polish immigrant balances a huge tape trunk on his shoulder, dressed in his best coat and hat for the new world. That single suitcase is his whole life made portable, and his tired eyes make it feel like a one-way doorway. In 1920, 6-year-old Nancy Bentley became an official mascot of the Royal Australian Navy after her family rushed her to the ship Sydney for urgent medical help near Tasmania. She received service number 000001 and a tiny uniform, then was discharged 8 days later at her parents' request. A Soviet Mi-24 helicopter cuts through Afghan mountain clouds, dragging a long smoke trail as bright streaks fall toward the valley. Built to carry soldiers and heavy equipment, the Mi-24 became the signature machine of the Soviet-Afghan conflict. Warsaw, June 15, 1934. Józef Pilsudski poses with German Ambassador Hans Adolf von Moltke, German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, and Polish Foreign Minister Josef Beck, months after Germany and Poland signed a non-aggression declaration. In the First World War, a German pack donkey nicknamed Kamerad Feldgrau stands loaded with gear, wearing a helmet like a tiny soldier. The staged label beside him turns a simple work animal into a comrade of the front. Mekelle, Ethiopia, November 1935. People stand beneath a huge propaganda banner showing Benito Mussolini in a steel helmet, hung like a new landmark among trees. The scale turns one face into a signal of who was meant to be seen as in control. Japan, 1972. Riot police in heavy helmets eat cup noodles straight from paper cups during the Osamu Sanso incident. A mass-market instant meal becomes field fuel in a national crisis, caught in one casual slurp. Dutch Harbor, Aleutian Islands, 1942. Thick smoke rises over the port after Imperial Japanese aircraft hit the base. A fighter that went down on nearby Akutan was recovered almost intact, giving engineers a rare look at the Zero. A New York police bomb technician in the 1940s models early protective gear: a thick padded vest, heavy gloves, and a boxy face shield that blocks almost all vision. It looks like homemade armor, showing how safety lagged behind the job's risks. Murmansk, winter 1941 to 1942. Soviet civilians form a human chain atop mountains of sacks, unloading supplies brought by Allied Arctic convoys. Those stacked bags are the visible edge of Lend-Lease, turning ocean shipping into heat, food, and machines on land. In 1917, hundreds of women marched through Petrograd with banners demanding bread and support for soldiers' families as shortages crushed daily life. This street protest helped ignite the February Revolution, and the Tsar abdicated within days. Germany, 1933. Waiters at a Bavarian snack bar carnival wear oversized animal and character masks while serving food behind the counter. The playful costumes make the kitchen look like a dream scene, where dinner arrives from strangers with borrowed faces. Tajikistan, Soviet Union, 1970s. A groom signs the marriage registration papers while the bride sits beside him covered head to toe in white. The scene shows how a family's biggest moment could begin with silent paperwork on a plain office desk. Centerville, California, 1942. A Japanese-American boy stands in his best suit with an identification tag waiting for a government evacuation bus. About two-thirds of the people removed this way were United States citizens. Frankfurt, Germany, 1947. A chimney sweep in a tall top hat poses with his bicycle, loaded with brushes and tools, photographed by Tony Vaccaro. The fancy hat and soot gear together make him look like a street magician of post-war survival. Near the Chernobyl power plant in 1986, long lines of cleanup workers gather beside a Lenin bust, waiting for orders. The reactor failure began at 1:23 at night on April 26, and about 600,000 people took part in the cleanup. On April 30, 1943, Remington workers May Zelinsky and Betty Obita run a Browning M1919 test rig, guiding a long metal belt through the mechanism. The setup shows how factory quality checks could decide whether mass production ran smoothly. A Japanese serviceman in China stands in tall grass wearing a gas mask and field helmet with a bulky backpack strapped tight. The blank round lenses and the handheld metal tool show how unseen air threats changed what normal gear looked like. In the 1860s, Confederate States of America officer Samuel Richardson poses for a studio portrait in bold spotted trousers, a wide hat, and a heavy belt. The wild pattern turns a stiff photo into a shock of personal style. In Potsdam, a guard nicknamed Long Joseph towers over his unit at about 2 meters 39 centimeters, making every helmet and uniform look miniature. He served in Kaiser Wilhelm II's army from 1905 to 1907. East Dallas, United States, 1928. 18-year-old Bonnie Parker sits behind the counter at Marco's Cafe beside the cash register and a glass tip jar. 2 years later, she met Clyde Barrow, and their names became a national legend. London Docklands, September 17, 1940. Long rows of homes are reduced to brick and splintered beams, with puddles reflecting the last standing walls. As a main port and warehouse zone, this damage meant fewer supplies reaching the city. Smoke towers over the factory district of Stalingrad as Junkers Ju-87 aircraft crossed the sky on 24 November 1942. This area included Red October, Barricadi, and the tractor plant, giant sites for steel and tanks. A Japanese nurse poses with a gas mask and a medical armband in a Second World War portrait that looks calm but ready for danger. In Japan, nursing grew fast after the Russo-Japanese War, and in 1887, Empress Shokan backed a volunteer nurses' society of court women who rolled bandages. Photographed in Djenné, Mali, in 1906, this noble family's adobe compound shows Sudano-Sahelian design with thick mud walls and sharp corner towers that keep rooms cool in hot weather. On November 5, 1900, chorus women from the Prince of Wales Theatre pose in London with a comic Guy Fawkes figure and stacks of celebration rockets before their evening show. The giant Catherine wheel and paper hat mirror the yearly Guy Fawkes Night Street tradition that packed sidewalks with curious onlookers. On a René Gillet motorcycle from 1912, a rider and passenger sit on a bicycle-style frame with pedals, thin-spoked wheels, and a large number 4 plate on the front. The pedals show how early motorcycles borrowed bicycle parts for starting. Napoleon, a unit mascot near Verdun, France in 1916, sits upright in a tiny cap as smiling French soldiers crowd around him for a photo. Mascot dogs like this boosted morale and sometimes carried small notes and supplies between positions. Werner Zulius, Left, and technician Willy Hennig pose at the Gotto Experimental Station near the Kummersdorf test grounds around 1942 to 1943, with instrument parts hanging from straps. After 1945, Zulius joined a top Soviet physics program. The caption says this is Elvis Aaron Presley in the United States Army, climbing onto a Patton M48 armored vehicle in the early 1960s with goggles and a heavy field jacket. He was drafted and served as a regular soldier in Germany. 3 men wear simple cloth masks during the 1918 influenza pandemic, a crisis that spread worldwide and reached roughly 1 in 4 people on Earth. Unlike most flu waves, it hit many healthy young adults hard, making crowded camps and low hygiene deadly amplifiers. In 1943 Leningrad, a bundled woman brushes paste onto a wall, posting a huge slogan that calls on every citizen to act. Photographer David Trachtenberg captured how public walls became the city's loudest voice when food and electricity were scarce. The caption identifies this stern sheriff as Richard James Hart, born James Vincenzo Capone, shaking hands with a man on a reservation where he worked. He spent his post-war life chasing the illegal alcohol trade while his younger brother became a famous underworld boss. A Russian Red Cross nurse from World War I poses in her veil and apron, wearing the St. George Cross and the St. George Medal for bravery on her chest. These awards were rarely given to nurses, marking her as one of the few officially honored for courage in extreme danger. In Chelyabinsk, Soviet Union, in 1990, men in winter uniforms heave huge aid sacks from a shipment sent from West Germany. The printed expiry date on the bags hints at how shortages turned foreign food parcels into a lifeline at the very end of the Soviet era. In October 1918, British troops march into Lille, France, smiling as the city reopens after 4 years under German control. A barefoot local boy wearing a borrowed British helmet proudly carries a soldier's long kit like a tiny escort. In January 1991 in Riga, citizens stacked logs, stones, and metal into street barricades beneath a pale church tower. Men warm their hands by a small fire while reading leaflets, holding Latvia's push for independence during the final days of Soviet rule. In October 1961 at Checkpoint Charlie in West Berlin, United States soldiers watched the crossing from a sandbagged rooftop beneath a sign that says, "You are leaving the American sector." This was the peak of the Berlin crisis, when rival forces faced each other just meters apart. The caption says this is a young Walt Disney in France with an American Red Cross ambulance posing beside a canvas panel marked with the Red Cross symbol. Before animation made him famous, he drove aid deliveries and even covered the vehicle with his own drawings. Miami in 1904 looks like a dusty frontier street, lined with simple wooden buildings and a few people standing outside shops. Just 8 years earlier, about 400 voters approved city status. And this photo shows how fast a tiny settlement began turning into a real city. The caption says this is Puyi, the last emperor of China, photographed in 1956, sitting in plain work clothes outside a brick building. After losing his throne, he was held by the Soviets, returned to China for reform, and later worked as a gardener and museum staff member. In 1947 at Aspen, Colorado, skiers lounge on a wooden deck beside a bar, boots off and faces turned toward the sun, with the Rockies filling the background. This was the early post-war boom of American ski culture, when lift towns were still small and a press ski meant sharing a bench and a view. A uniformed handler tries to pull a horse out of knee-deep mud while a loaded cart sinks behind them on a churned field. In the 1914 to 1918 conflict, about 1 million horses were taken for transport, and only about 65,000 returned to civilian life. In Deadwood, Dakota Territory, Colorado, Charlie Utter kneels with Arapaho Joe as they set a headstone on the original grave of frontier celebrity Wild Bill Hickok. The marker turns a rough hillside into a tourist legend because Hickok's name drew crowds to Deadwood long after his death. Two coal miners stand at a mine entrance beside loaded carts and narrow rails, showing how work and transport were packed into a few dark feet of tunnel. From 1890 to 1930, wage fights in Appalachia and Colorado made places like this a tense checkpoint where unions, company guards. In 1944, near Aachen, American soldiers crowd around a Jewish chaplain in a prayer shawl as he reads from a small book outdoors. The caption says this was the first public Jewish service in Germany since Adolf Hitler took power, held by the United States Army. In Germany in 1914, a mother tightens her son's straps and checks his packed kit as other families gather for the same farewell. The flowers tucked into his helmet capture the early belief that the journey would be short before the conflict proved long and brutal. Two women in fur collars pose on a balcony above a wide river and arched bridges in Cornwall, England, on May 6, 1932. The caption links the seated woman to the first person who was both deaf and blind to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. In 1882, Jumbo the elephant towers over his keeper, Matthew Scotty Scott, showing the exact scale that made crowds gasp. Jumbo became the first global animal celebrity, and his name still means extra large in everyday speech. Friends, I have shown you my favorite historical photographs that have sunk into my soul. Which photo did you like the most? Write about it and tell me why.